thing, but that's self-defeating, because when I say that, I'm making a truth claim that if reason is subjective, then we can't come to any true conclusions about anything. That actually is an objective truth claim.
Well, I would say that even with something as objective as maths, there are subjective ways in which to understand it, the language we use, even though it seems that it wouldn't be the case. For instance, if you want to find the roots of a quadratic equation, you can do it by using the quadratic formula. You can do it by expanding the brackets, and you get to the same answer. But the reason you're using to get there is subjective. So the answer is a fact of nature. It's true. That would still be the answer, even if humans didn't exist. But the language we use to get there, and the reason that we use to get there, wouldn't.
Yeah, but the reason is objective, but there's different levels here. You have ontology, which is the study of being.
Sure.
Okay. You have epistemology, that's how we know the study of being. Then you might have semantics, which is how you describe the epistemology to get to the ontology.
Sure.
This can be arbitrary, but it's still tethered to objective facts. It's ultimately tethered to an objective ontology.
So what are the tenets of objective reason to you?
Welcome to the Revel Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.
Well, start with the basic laws of logic, that they're...
For instance...
the law of the excluded middle, things like that.
Law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, law of inference, law of identity. Those are the essentials of the laws of logic. And you start with those, and then you use your sense perceptions to draw conclusions about the real world using those tools, those objective laws of logic.
They're tools, and this is the thing that I see when we're talking about.
All right, so atheists often employ various arguments to refute the existence of God, particularly Jesus. However, a meticulous examination reveals that some of these arguments inadvertently violate fundamental laws of logic. And really, this is what Frank Turek here is getting to when he's talking to Alex here. Because to understand this, we must first explore the foundations of logic, the foundational principles, and then analyze how certain atheistic contentions and arguments really fall in the light of violating these laws of logic. So what we'll do first is we'll go over what the laws of logic are. And Frank Turek mentioned them here, and we'll kind of go in depth in what they are and how they're violated in most atheistic arguments. And the first one we'll cover here is the law of identity. So this law asserts that an entity is identical to itself. So in formal terms, A equals A. And so it emphasizes that every entity has a specific nature and essence. Okay, and the second one is the law of non-contradiction. So the law of non-contradiction states that contradictory statements cannot be both true simultaneously. That is, A and not A cannot be true in the same sense at the same time. Okay, and the third one is the law of excluded middle. So this law posits that for any proposition, either that proposition is true or its negation is true, that there is no middle ground. So in essence, A or not A must be true. One of them must be true. Okay, so we're going to go through the basic arguments against God, and we'll talk about really how they contradict the laws of logic. Number one, the problem of evil. Okay, so the existence of evil and suffering in the world is incompatible with an omnipotent, omnibenevolent God. So either he's all-powerful, or he's all good, or he's neither, or he's just one or the other. Well, there's evil, therefore God can't be both of those, because if he was all-powerful, he would stop the evil from happening, and if he was all good, he would want to stop all the evil that's happening. Okay, so what law does this violate? It violates the law of non-contradiction. How does it violate the law of non-contradiction? My tongue is going to get tied here. Okay, so this argument basically assumes that the existence of evil directly contradicts the existence of an all-good, all-powerful God. However, this overlooks the possibility that God could have morally sufficient reasons for permitting evil, such as the facilitation of free will or the development of virtuous character. So by not considering these possibilities, the argument presents a false dichotomy, implying that God's existence and the presence of evil are mutually exclusive, which are not necessarily true. And how the Christian worldview really is able to tackle this is in Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So this suggests that even evil or suffering can be used for good by God. Also, Isaiah 55, 8-9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. So this passage also underscores that God's rationale for allowing evil might be beyond human understanding. Kind of like in the same manner as a kid wouldn't really understand why the parents are doing certain things. They're unable to grasp the reason for it and the benefits of it, right? Okay, then the next one really that atheists will talk about. So the argument is this. It's the incoherence of divine attributes. The attributes ascribed to God, omniscience, omnipotent, omnibenevolence, are internally inconsistent or mutually contradictory, rendering the concept of God incoherent. So since omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipotent, all-powerful, and omnibenevolent, all good, cannot be consistent with one another, they contradict each other, therefore the concept of God is incoherent. Okay, so what law is this violating? Well, defining God with these attributes leads to contradictions. Well, when you look at classical theism, God's nature is understood as a harmonious unity where these attributes coexist without contradiction. So the perceived inconsistencies often arise from anthropomorphic projections or misunderstandings of these divine qualities. For instance, omnipotent does not entail the ability to perform logical impossibilities, such as creating a square circle, as such tasks are nonsensical and do not pertain to power. So when an atheist will say, well, God cannot make 1 + 1 = 3, or he can't make a square triangle, therefore he's not all-powerful, really violates this law of identity. And remember, the law of identity states that A is A. So entity has a special nature or a special essence, right? Just like what God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent you. So this emphasizes God's self-existence and unity of essence. Matthew 19:26, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So here in Matthew, we see that omnipotence is affirmed, but within the bounds of logical coherence. John 4:8 says, God is love. So this asserts God's omnibenevolence, suggesting that his love and power work in harmony rather than contradiction. Moving forward, empirical evidence and scientism. Okay, so scientism is very big nowadays. And here's the argument for it. Only empirical evidence derived from scientific inquiry is valid for establishing truth claims. So without scientific inquiry, there can't be a truth claim. Since God's existence cannot be empirically verified, and they'll go to empirical verification against, let's say, certain miracles, belief in God is unjustified. Okay, what law does this violate? It violates the law of non-contradiction. So scientism is basically self-refuting. The assertion that only empirical evidence leads to truth is itself a philosophical claim. So when somebody says, oh, well, science, the only things that are real are things science can prove, you just say, well, that in itself can't be proven by science because that's a philosophical claim. And that philosophical claim is one that cannot be empirically tested or verified. Therefore, it contradicts its own criterion for truth, undermining its validity. Now, how does the Bible deal with this? Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So faith transcends empirical evidence, suggesting that not all truth is accessible through science, including, I have faith that my wife will remain faithful. I have faith that my child loves me. I may not have empirical evidence for these things, but you have faith and you trust that they are true. John 20:19. Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And so this verse also challenges the notion that only empirical evidence warrants belief. Okay, moving forward. Let's talk about the one God less argument, because this is one that often comes up. So atheists reject belief in various deities, just as theists reject all God except one. Therefore, atheists simply go one God further in their disbelief. So basically, this argument fails to recognize the distinct identity and nature of the monotheistic God compared to other deities. So the God of classical theism is conceived as the necessary, uncaused, and maximally great being, fundamentally different from contingent, anthropomorphic gods of other mythologies. And by conflating these distinct concepts, the argument overlooks the unique philosophical grounding for belief in the monotheistic God. So Deuteronomy 4:35, to you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God, there is no one besides him. So emphasizing the uniqueness of the God of Israel. Isaiah 44:6, thus says the Lord, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first and I am the last. Besides me, there is no God. So again, another passage underscoring the exclusivity and distinct identity of a monotheistic God. Okay, let's go into probably one of the more popular ones, I guess. So atheistic moral realism. Objective moral values exist independent of God. Therefore, one can have a coherent moral framework without invoking a deity. So what this is basically now is the law of excluded middle. This position attempts to affirm objective moral values while denying a transcendent source for them. However, without an absolute grounding, moral values become subjective and culturally contingent. And so the argument occupies an untenable middle ground, asserting the existence of objective morals without providing a sufficient foundation, thereby violating the law of excluded middle by not fully committing to either moral absolutism grounded in the divine or moral relativism. So oftentimes atheists get caught in this middle. They'll assert something like moral absolutes. They'll say, no, I have moral absolutes, but they're subjective. And that in itself is incoherent, right? That is choosing the middle ground. A is either A or A is either not A, or not A is either not A. Okay, let's talk about the coherence of theistic belief. So how does believing in God actually make sense? Okay, let's look at the law of identity. God is understood as the ultimate being whose essence is existence itself, as articulated in the declaration, I am who I am. So God is self-identifying, and this self-identifying nature underscores the coherence and consistency of God's being. Okay, let's talk about law of non-contradiction. Christian doctrine maintains that God's nature is consistent and unchanging. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the mysteries of faith, such as the Trinity, are understood as complex truths that transcend human comprehension, but do not violate logical coherence. And lastly, how does the law of excluded middle get avoided in Christianity and follow the laws of logic? Well, Christianity presents a clear dichotomy regarding salvation and moral truth, emphasizing the necessity of choosing between following Christ or not, thereby upholding the principle that a proposition and its negation cannot both be true. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So this illustrates the coherence of God's nature as both distinct and unified. Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So God's immutability, speaking of God's unchanging nature, aligning with the law of identity. And in 1 Corinthians 1:25, for the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. And this reflects the transcendence of divine logic over human understanding. Okay, so you see there's harmony in the Christian faith. And the harmony between faith and reason is a cornerstone of Christian belief. And so far from being irrational, faith in God provides a coherent and comprehensive framework that satisfies both the intellect and the soul. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ stand as historical, transformative events that invite every individual into a personal relationship with the divine. And so consider the profound implications of Christ's resurrection. It's not merely an event of the past, but a present reality that offers hope, purpose, and redemption. One that a naturalistic, atheistic, agnostic framework cannot really give us. And it's logical. In Christ, we encounter the ultimate expression of love and truth, and a person who embodies the very principles of logic and reason, yet transcends them in divine mystery. And so as we reflect on these truths, let us open our hearts and minds to the possibility that faith in Jesus is not a leap into the irrational, but a step into the fullness of life and understanding and meaning and fulfillment. Embrace the invitation to our hearts and minds, allowing the transformative power of a relationship with Jesus to lead us into a life of purpose and eternal significance.